Are intense educational reforms the ultimate key to a nation's success, or are they actually a fast track to global isolation? That is the fierce academic debate we're unpacking today. Welcome to this explainer. We're diving deep into the U.D.R's education system, specifically looking at a fascinating but kind of alarming phenomenon where extreme academic rigor crashes headfirst into what sociologists are warning is a dangerous level of isolationism. On one side, proponents are championing some undeniable academic success stories, but on the other, well, critics are definitely sounding the alarm on the global fallout.
Okay, let's jump right into our roadmap for today. First, we'll define exactly what academic nationalism is. Then we'll trace the roots of these reforms. After that, we'll zoom in on the actual student experience, look at the intense admissions rivalry, and finally, unpack the resulting sociological impacts and isolationism.
All right, Section 1, Defining Academic Nationalism, a New Ideology.
So, to frame this debate properly, the absolutely crucial point to understand here is that this specific brand of nationalism has literally nothing to do with physical borders or military might. Nope. Emerging in the 2020s, it is entirely about dominating the academic arena. It's an ideology that pushes the Rakanian education system to the absolute limit, driving students to achieve unparalleled excellence. The endgame, securing ultra-competitive graduate school admissions and super-coveted tenure-track faculty positions. It's just an intense, singular focus on intellectual supremacy.
Moving on to Section 2, The Roots of Reform, Global Influences.
So where did this all come from? Well, while the U.D.R. has never been directly influenced by traditional Confucianism, they heavily adopted specific cultural tenets largely from neighboring Romania. They essentially became a pseudo-Confucian country. This meant adopting a massive cultural emphasis on education, treating educators as essential moral advisors, and, this is the big one, treating academic success not just as a personal goal, but as a direct moral obligation to society.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the U.D.R. essentially cobbled together a super system. They pulled distinct global philosophies together like a giant puzzle to create their own incredibly rigorous hybrid model. They took that cultural emphasis on education from Confucianist countries like China, Korea, and Japan, but then they structured it using the Prussian education model, adopted the French secular model under Jules Ferry for the actual academics, and pulled broader structural ideas from Western Europe, especially England. It's a highly engineered, globally sourced educational machine.
So, what triggered this machine to go into overdrive? Let's walk through the timeline. In March 2021, the U.D.R. experienced the Clover, a massive systemic failure caused by poor academic planning. This huge shortfall basically triggered an extreme overcorrection. By the mid-2020s, academic nationalism was rapidly accelerating. And by 2025, President Wallace's speeches were actively fueling the competitive fire. This timeline perfectly highlights exactly where political ambition and sociological reality start to fracture, leading right up to the formal analysis published by sociologist Oyuki in January 2026. Next up, Section 3, The Student Experience, Kurumi's Turnaround.
For proponents of these reforms, the success is incredibly tangible on the ground. Take a look at Kurumi, a student aiming to be an accounting professor. Look at this stark contrast. In high school, she had a 2.9 GPA, but by fall 2025, operating entirely under this heavily reformed system, she was holding a 3.8 out of 4.0. This turnaround is constantly held up as an objective, undeniable success of the post-Clover overhaul.
But honestly, that 3.8 did not come easy. To get a sense of the sheer intensity, just look at her spring 2025 schedule. She decided to take Intermediate Accounting B, Cost Accounting, and Federal Tax Law, all at the exact same time. That's a combo that would literally make most accounting majors break out in a cold sweat. Tackling all that required a complete, grueling revamp of her study habits, which really reflects the punishing demands these students put on themselves. And you know what? She passed all of them with A's.
Now, what's really interesting here is how she thrived under immense pressure against international standards of rigor. In fall 2025, she took organizational behavior with Professor Jonathan Fon. He was a notoriously strict Singaporean professor who actively challenged his students and basically dared them to try and earn an A. Kurumi stepped up, revamped her study habits once again, and placed in the top 10 out of 120 students.
But it's this quote that really gets to the heart of it. Following that grueling semester, Kurumi said, "If I wasn't doing it for myself, I was doing it for the U.D.R." That right there perfectly captures the absolute internalization of academic nationalism. Her individual struggle, her late-night study sessions, they were inextricably linked to national pride and duty.
All right, Section 4, Rivalry and Admissions Competition.
So, imagine dedicating your entire youth to a single goal, only to realize the resources you're fighting for are incredibly limited. It creates a fierce battleground. This internal drive very quickly manifested as an intense, perceived international rivalry. The ultimate prizes? Elite graduate school admissions and those ultra-rare tenure-track faculty positions.
In this extremely high-stakes environment, Raconian students began viewing specific international demographics not as peers, but as direct competitors. As outlined in the source data, this included Chinese and Korean students, who were highly represented in prestigious grad schools, Indian students, heavily represented in quantitative fields like math and engineering, and Singaporean students, who traditionally top international rankings like the TIMSS. The mindset completely shifted. These students were perceived as direct roadblocks to Raconian academic survival.
Which leads us to our final core theme, Section 5, Sociological Impacts and Isolationism.
This brings us to the very crux of the formal academic debate. In January 2026, sociologist Oa Yuki published a pivotal paper challenging the system's proponents. Yuki basically analyzed the really harsh friction between the U.D.R's relentless political ambition and the traditional, open, collaborative nature of the global research community.
And Yuki's findings are pretty stark. The paper documents the emergence of anti-East Asian and, to a lesser extent, anti-Indian sentiment within the U.D.R. Now, Yuki is very careful to note that this isn't necessarily rooted in pure xenophobia. Instead, it's the result of viewing these international peers strictly as hostile rivals for those limited academic positions. Because of this, there's been a profound reduction in the desire among Raconian students to collaborate with anyone across borders.
Let's see exactly how this builds. This is the step-by-step mechanism of how ambition actively causes scientific isolationism. Step 1, you have the intense drive to outpace and surpass international peers. Step 2, that competitive friction leads to a flat-out refusal to share data or work with foreign students. And finally, Step 3, it culminates in actively hoarding U.D.R. research papers strictly within national borders. They're fundamentally cutting the nation off from the global scientific community.
And while sociologists are waving giant red flags about isolation, the political rhetoric at the top pushes the exact opposite narrative. President David Wallace, the catalyst for a lot of this, used some pretty extreme rhetoric in 2025, talking about outpacing, surpassing, and even exterminating the competition. When the language of academic pursuit starts mirroring the language of warfare, international collaboration becomes almost literally impossible.
Which leaves us with this final, really critical question. The U.D.R. has definitely achieved incredible academic turnarounds, transforming their education system into a total powerhouse. But as this formal academic debate shows, the cost of that excellence is immense friction, intense rivalry, and a deliberate withdrawal from open global science. Will the U.D.R.'s relentless pursuit of academic dominance ultimately leave them standing entirely alone in the dark? It's a fascinating and complex situation for sure. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep learning.